October is definitely one of my favorite times to read, and so I did a ton of reading vlogs. So for this wrap up, I just want to spend a little bit more time talking about some of the books that I haven't talked about yet, and then towards the end of the video, I will then kind of really briefly give my hot takes on the books that I filmed myself reading through the month. I read 13 books. Oh, that's quite thematic, but that's including one DNF that just wasn't working so well for me. So maybe I'll start off with my DNF. I started to read One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. Something about this author always gets me conceptually. Like, I love her ideas. This is sort of like Romeo and Juliet, but between witches' covens, set in modern day New York. And of course it's like crime families. So immediately from that description, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want. Put it in my veins. And the book is really angst central, but I just didn't feel that engaged in the characters. I honestly can't remember anyone's names anymore. Like, the sort of matriarchal witch coven with like the cute girls is Russian, and then I think the other one was Italian or something like that. We're really going with stereotypes here. But there's like the girl side and the guy side, and we get both perspectives, and it really follows kind of a fairly typical Romeo and Juliet sort of story. But it seems like there's like 2 sisters and then 2 brothers, so it's like Romeo and Juliet times 2. But I got about like 50% into it, and the character that I was really actually invested in and like actually found interesting died. I just didn't care. I just wasn't very motivated to pick the book up once I kind of put it down for the evening, and I just never did. You can totally understand why some people really enjoy it. It just wasn't for me. On to another downer, actually. I think this is the only other one that I was like very disappointed by. Editing stuff here, I just realized that I never told you what the book actually is called. It's The Whispering Muse by Laura Purcell. This is my first book by Laura Purcell. She's kind of carved herself out a little niche in the historical gothic genre, and I was kind of saving one of her books for something to read around Halloween, so I picked this up because it sounded right up my spooky little alley. So in this book, we follow Jenny, who is sort of a lower-ish class woman in the Victorian era in London, and she gets a job. If you can hear rattling, it's just my windows rattling from aggressive wind outside. We might have a thunderstorm coming. So Jenny is going to be the dresser or like a costumer for the leading lady at Mercury Theatre. But she's also kind of undercover there as like an employee from the theater director or owner's wife, who is a little bit suspicious about like her husband and like what is he up to. So she also wants Jenny to be like reporting on the theater director to his wife. And so Jenny is working with this woman Lilith, who is notoriously difficult, and there are a lot of rumors that she has made a pact with, I think it's Methuselah, Greek muse of tragedy, pretty much, to become one of the greatest actresses ever. I felt very meh about this because it's so heavily branded as gothic, and just that description feels like it should be gothic and like very dark academia leaning almost. I just feel like it really lacked the tension and the atmosphere. Like, the atmosphere was really inconsistent, because sometimes she would have these like amazing like descriptions and like prose, and other times it was like very sparse, which is not really what I associate with gothic fiction at all, especially a historic gothic fiction, and like just getting through the plot as fast as you can. And then Jenny as a character is also terribly interesting. She had a few moments of interesting inner conflict with this undercover spy secretly reporting on this guy, but it still felt like the story was really about Lilith, but it was being told by Jenny, who's just a spectator. So it felt like there was a huge amount of distance between us and the plot and like the emotional like salience of the plot. If you are looking for something that is more historical leaning than like specifically gothic leaning, then maybe this is really fun for you. I just went in looking for gothic, and it didn't really deliver on that for me. Now we get to talk about books that I did really enjoy. I picked up Wayward Pines. I haven't read anything by this author before. He also wrote Dark Matter, which was floating around a year or two, a couple years ago. And I did not realize this is also a TV series. I have not watched that TV series, but I might give it a try now because I hear it's a little bit more diverse. But Wayward Pines is about an FBI agent who goes to this really tiny town called Wayward Pines, and he is looking to find out what happened to his colleagues. He has a little bit of personal history and feeling there, and they haven't heard from them in a really long time, so he has gone there to ask around and figure things out. But the book begins where he has actually gotten into a car crash on his way to Wayward Pines and is waking up in the hospital in that city. He has like no ID, no money, no like nothing. The whole like thrust of the book is like really him running around figuring out what is going on, because there's something strange about the town. It's a weird town, it's a creepy town. There are some sci-fi kind of elements to it. I don't really know what else I can actually say about it to describe like the book without going to spoiler territory, but that is definitely like the vibe. It's the running around trying to uncover like what the fuck is going on. My only sort of criticism is probably that there is a little bit less character development. It's a pretty short book as well. It's under 300 pages, but I think given the premise of the book and like how hit and run it is, I actually feel like I'm okay with that, and it is a series, so I'm going to continue probably reading that in the next few months and find out what continues to happen. Okay, the other book that I read this month was called What Lies in the Woods, and this one is like a thriller, going back to your hometown type of book. Okay, so we follow Naomi. She is one of a trio of girls who were part of like a horrific attack that happened to Naomi, and then like the other two witnessed it. So Naomi is obviously scarred inside and out, and the book begins, the guy who they convicted and sent to jail for this attack has actually died in prison, and that brings up a lot of things for Naomi. She wants to go back to her hometown. All of this begins to pull up a lot of secrets and memories and baggage and stuff from that time period. There's also this dude who's really into like true crime podcasting that's like kind of hitting her up for interviews, and things get pretty dangerous for those girls, and the secret of what actually happened that day is revealed. This book felt very long. I think it was like 400 pages, but it felt like it just went on and on and on and on and on. But I also like didn't mind, and I think I kind of had guessed what like the main twist was gonna be, but I had a lot of fun getting there. That going home and like dealing with past relationships, past baggage, secrets, all of the stuff that is like unearthed and like memories from somebody's like hometown where they grew up is always going to be like one of my most favorite tropes ever. And another thing that I really enjoyed about this book was how she really dug into female relationships and like how close these girls were, the secrets that are between them and how they keep the secrets, and like what their motivations are. It was very atmospheric, it was very creepy. I loved the woods. It really felt like I was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, which was exactly the feeling that I was looking for. So What Lies in the Woods, maybe not a 5-star book, but up there. After that, I read The Crane Wife. This is definitely a 5-star book for me. I really enjoyed this, and I would recommend this to, actually before I start recommending it, I'm gonna actually tell you what it is first. I wrote The Crane Wife in my notes, but actually it's supposed to be The Crane Husband. That's the name of the book, The Crane Husband. But it's inspired by Japanese folklore called The Crane Wife. This book is definitely a horror-leaning story. We follow a 15-year-old girl, but I would not necessarily say that this is targeting a YA audience. I don't think that it is. But this girl is the primary caregiver for her younger sibling, and her brother and her mom live on this farm, and they're quite poor. Until one day that her mom comes home and brings this man who is a crane, her crane husband, and he begins to live with them and you see less of her. There's nobody really bringing in any kind of income, so the kids are kind of a bit neglected. The girl realizes that she has to take action to maintain her and her brother's living situation because there's like a social worker who's starting to sniff around. Also, possibly for her mother's safety as well. We have a bit of magical realism because he's like literally a giant bird coming home. This is my husband. But it deals a lot with child neglect and abuse and how kind of like family mythologies are created around domestic violence and abuse. I really loved it. I thought everything was just done so well. Anybody who likes Ava Reid should definitely check this out. And even if you didn't like Ava Reid, you should definitely check this out because it's really good book. Up next, I did a reread, and that was Discovery of Witches. I love this book so much. I think it's really funny because I reread Twilight recently, and I had heard back when I picked this up ages ago that this is like a Twilight for adults. And I didn't really see the similarities, but there's like definitely similarities on my reread. So we follow a witch named Diana. She doesn't use her magic, but she is a witch. Instead, she is a professor or an academic, currently at Oxford on like she is there researching alchemy, and while she's there, she accidentally does a big stir in the magical community by summoning Ashmal 179-872-97. My best friend watches this, she's gonna be screaming at the screen right now. I'm sorry. But she summons a book. It causes like a magical stir. It's been kind of missing for a long time, and this attracts the attention of Matthew de Clermont. And he is a vampire, a very French vampire who likes wine. They kind of get in a bit of a mess together as all of the other witches and demons and vampires are after them and after Diana specifically, trying to get a hold of this very valuable book. That's a really very, very brief surface description. I love it. I love the relationship between Matthew and Diana. The whole like world is super exciting to me, and Matthew is also like a scientist in like neuroscience, which is very like fun. Great book to be reading around Halloween, around October. If anybody is into anything witchy, you should pick it up. Then picked up a book purely for the cover because it gave me such a giggle. I, after that, read My Roommate is a Vampire. This is a newer release. So in it, we follow Cassie, and she is really strapped financially. She needs somewhere to live and finds like a suspiciously like dirt cheap apartment. Of course, you find out later that the owner of this apartment, who's renting it out, who she is also living with and has all these like strange rules and stuff about living there, is a vampire. This was surprisingly well written. I mean, I really just picked it up for the cover and because it just looked like a fun, good time, and I really enjoyed it. It is very different from what I think is very common in a lot of vampire romances as well, because the guy, Frederick is his name. He has a very like long ass historical name, but Frederick is not like an alpha man kind of character at all. He's not very cavemanish. He's a gentleman from another century who often doesn't understand very much about the current century because he's been sleeping for a very, very, very long time. So we get Cassie's point of view directly, but then we get like letters that they leave for each other in the apartment, or like text messages, or sometimes it's like Google search history that provides a bit of like Frederick's perspective, and it's very good. It's very funny. Had a lot of fun with it. It's a pretty slow burn romance as well. My Roommate is a Vampire is a fun, good time. The last book that I was not vlogging about actively is also a romance, and that is Losing It. This is about a girl who attends theater school. She's a virgin. The girl is going to lose her virginity and goes out with her friend, goes home with a guy right before the semester starts, is about to sleep with him, freaks out and leaves him naked in her apartment and like runs out. Fast forward 1 week, she walks into class and that's her teacher. I haven't actually got a whole lot to say about this. Edged on silliness and like it was like supposed to trying to be a rom-com, but it was a little bit too commie. Not like communist, but like comedy. But I mean, that's just like kind of part of the premise of of this sort of book as well. So it was a very nice like palate cleanser, and it was like very low stakes, so losing it. And actually what's very funny about this to me, the funniest part about this whole book, is that there are two drastically different covers. One cover says, "I am going to be a very, very dirty book indeed." And the other one is like, "We're here for a cute, fun time." And it's much more like the illustrated cover energy throughout the book than like the other one. Okay, the next 4 books I'm going to kind of somewhat talk about in tandem. They are all in the same vlog. That is the Reading Dark Fairy Tales, the Nightmare Before Christmas reading vlog, starting with Two Twisted Crowns. This is a fantastic book if you're into gothic fantasy, where you're primarily in the head of Elspeth, who lives in a mist-locked village, and she has like another character inside her head that is like a little devious and gives her like sort of special powers and is always threatening to take over. She gets kind of pulled in with this band of people who are trying to free the city from the mist by collecting all of these tarot cards that give people special powers. Very fast summary. Book 2, you get a bit more POV, which I liked. I wish that we saw more of Elspeth because she was my favorite character, but overall I thought it was a wonderful conclusion to a duology. I also read The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is a book that was published in the 1987-ish. This is my second book by Angela Carter, and she, I think, is known most for The Bloody Chamber, which is a collection of short stories. They're all inspired by Western fairy tales, often kind of combines different fairy tales. They're like dark, bloody feminist. And yeah, I really loved that. Her writing is a little bit more loaded, it's a bit more flowery and takes more time to digest. Like sometimes she uses a lot of punctuation and sometimes she leans towards using less and having quite long sentences, but I think that really fits the kind of environment that she's creating. Following that, I read Not Good for Maidens, which is inspired by The Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. This one I really started to enjoy a lot when we hit like the halfway through point, because that's when we actually hit the Goblin Market. There's a ton of family secrets and history, and I think you get a little bit of lore, especially as it pertains to the family and like the girls that we're following in the market in the first half. And that part I enjoyed, but I was there for the Goblin Market, and so I enjoyed the later part the most. And I think this is a really great read for anybody who is looking for somebody that is writing fairies and fae in a similar way to Holly Black. After that, I read The Hollow Places, which is by T. Kingfisher, and it's sort of like a creepy Narnia. Not quite, but like a little bit. We follow a woman who is recently separated from her husband, and she has gone to live with her uncle for a little while and help out with his like junk museum. Finds a hole in the wall of the museum, enters through it, and is a spooky place, kind of like the Wood Between the Worlds. Shit goes down. As always, T. Kingfisher always does such a great job with creating really interesting characters. Like, they always have a quirk or like an interesting personality. Like she takes that, like, give your character like a quirk or like a thing to make them unique very seriously, but I actually think she does it really, really well. Okay, the next 2 books I talked about in my Japan reading vlog, a little bit more in depth, and I'm basically going to just mention them because they are really best read when you're going in pretty much blind. So the first was The Lonely Castle in the Mirror. This is based in Tokyo and follows Kokoro, who is bullied at school and decides to start to stay home. Finds one day that her mirror in her bedroom is glowing. She puts her hand on it, is sucked through, and there is a young girl there called the Wolf Queen, as well as a bunch of other children who seem to be in a similar boat as she is. It's the first book in, I think, years, or like a year at least, to actually make me shed actual full like tears. It was just a wonderful magical realism novel. After that, I read Sweet Bean Paste, which is also written by a Japanese author. This one is a contemporary fiction that is a bit on the shorter end. I think it's like 250 pages or so. We follow a ex-con, and he is working in a shop where they make little like patisserie kind of things, like little pancakes with sweet bean paste in the center, like a little sandwich. And he hires this woman who is sort of socially isolated and discriminated against a little bit, and they kind of build this beautiful relationship, and it really challenges a lot of how he thinks about the world and experiences the world. And so yeah, Sweet Bean Paste was just a really lovely sweet book and a really nice change from the kind of thing that I typically pick up. So those are all of the books that I read in October. If you're still watching this video, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching to the end. Let me know if you read any of these books or if you want to. I realized that I haven't posted for a couple of weeks, but that was actually because I was having my wedding reception. We got married the beginning of this year, and that's like part of what my dated. Better if I show it like this. So maybe I'll include a little bit of footage in my next November wrap-up when I actually get some of it. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that. And yeah, thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope you have a great day, evening, morning, whatever's ahead of you. Bye!